I have gone down a lot of dark roads on this channel, but I have not been able to stop thinking about this case for years. And the fact that there has just been a Netflix documentary, Maternal Instincts, released, I definitely had to watch it, and it brought all of that concern back to the surface. Today, I want to talk about Taylor Parker. Who was Taylor Parker? She was a woman who could not have a baby, but claimed that she was pregnant. And she carried on this facade for months until her lie literally made her do the unthinkable. If she couldn't make a baby, she was going to take one. And not just kidnap out of a crib, she was going to take this child from a mother's womb. And this would not be on a whim. We're talking about 10 months of performance, of having a silicone belly and sonograms that she literally ordered off the internet, a gender reveal, a nursery. All of it would stall towards a deadline that she knew she couldn't meet. But the whole time, she already knew what she was going to have to do when the clock ran out. And this story is not just about a faked pregnancy. It's about a woman who got so lost in her lies that the reality of the situation became worse than anyone could have imagined. So sit back, relax, and take a deep breath. It's time to let the fresh air in. Hello, everyone. Welcome back, or welcome if you're new. My name is Erin, and I am fascinated by all things cults, controversial, and true crime. So if you are into that sort of thing, consider subscribing to the channel. I post at least one video on one of these topics every single week. And I'm really excited to be launching my 3-tier membership starting next month in July. So keep an eye out for that. Also, I am so curious what y'all are doing while you watch these videos. I always like to listen to podcasts while I'm cleaning or working. So, what are you guys up to on this fine Saturday? I've decided to try to reinvigorate my curls. This is my natural wave. Right now it's wavy. It used to be like ringlets, but then I blow dried it every day for years. So now it's more wavy. So I'm trying to bring the curl back. I've got my curly girl routine going on. So we'll see how it goes this summer. It's so humid where I live that even trying to style my hair is just fruitless. By the end of this video, I will probably look like a glazed donut, and not in the cute clean girl aesthetic way, in the girl needs to go take a shower way. But with all that being said, thank you so much for being here. Now, before we dig in, I want to point out that the name that always gets remembered in this case is Taylor Parker's. And it's because what she did is so egregious and shocking that people just want to understand what was going on in her brain. But really, we should be focusing on Reagan and her baby Braxlyn. So just keep those names in your head as we move through this story. Now, if you haven't seen the documentary or haven't seen another amazing creator like Daniel Kirsty or Annie Elise cover this case, just know that the name Reagan and the name Braxlyn are both so important to this story. I mean, they are really the entire reason I want to tell this version of the story. Now, I'm going to get into some of the things that the documentary covered, but there were a lot of details that were left out probably just for time. I mean, it was already a pretty lengthy documentary. It was already very gripping, and we got to hear from a lot of people very, very close to the situation. So I really appreciated how Netflix did it. But there's just some of the nitty-gritty I want to get into today, as well as draw some parallels to other fake pregnancy cases that we have covered. So without further ado, let's jump in. Taylor Renee Parker was born December 1992 in Titus County in the northeast corner of Texas. Her parents were Shona Pryor and Mark Morton, who were divorced when she was young. Her brother would share later at her trial that her father was basically out of the picture. Taylor had the very same pattern of behavior. She was just chasing a man. And when she was chasing a man, her own kids would get put on the back burner because it was just all about her. And this is super ironic because, as you'll find out later, she seemed to be desperate for a new baby, even though she already had two that were just not even in her life at all. Now, she would become a mother for the first time at 17 with her boyfriend named Donald Whiteside Jr., who, by her own mother's account, was barely in the picture at all. Her mom said that Taylor met him exactly once, and the court later heard that Whiteside changed jobs to keep his wages from being garnished for child support. That first child was a daughter named Emerson. So the instability around Taylor's children was there from the very first one on both sides. We have effectively a deadbeat dad and then a mom who eventually just starts to take a backseat to her child's life. So then we move into the marriages. She has two of them. Her first husband was a man named Tommy Wackesy, and they had a son together named Trey when Taylor was around 21 years old. And it was during that marriage that the single most important medical fact in this entire case would unfold. So, Taylor had a really dangerous pregnancy. She was experiencing preeclampsia, which is a serious blood pressure condition. And since this pregnancy was so dangerous and it would have caused just pain for both her and her child, and it was just very dangerous for both, she ended up having to get her tubes tied to prevent another pregnancy. And this is obviously a devastating, traumatic experience for any mother to have. I mean, no mother who wants her child and ends up in this kind of situation wants to have to decide, okay, so not only do I have to get a procedure so that this child isn't born, but I also have to have my tubes tied so I cannot carry another child ever again. So I don't even get another chance. There's a creator who I have been following for years who's have had a late stage miscarriage, and watching her story is just so incredibly heartbreaking because that's one of her biggest challenges is trying to understand why it happened to her and what is quote unquote wrong with her, even though nothing might be wrong. It could be just a crazy accident. But as a mom, you're going to take on some of that blame yourself, especially when you're just so close to this tiny thing growing inside you already. So I can only imagine it was heartbreaking and traumatic and devastating for Taylor. But then, about 2 years later, she ended up having an ectopic pregnancy and would have to end up in surgery, where doctors found a lot of cysts and scarring from endometriosis. So, while she was still under anesthesia, a decision was made by her husband and her mother to perform a full hysterectomy. Now, this must be another added layer of trauma. You are experiencing this health issue and you go under, and a decision is made without your knowledge about your body and your body's future that can change the trajectory of your entire life, of your health, of your total ability to ever have a child ever again, had you even wanted to. Now, yes, her tubes were already tied. It was unlikely she would ever have a kid. But I just can't help but wonder if there was something psychologically that happened where all of this is out of her control. She doesn't get to make any decisions about her body. And if what she ends up doing is some type of like twisted trauma response to having to have a hysterectomy without her knowledge. And that obviously doesn't, justify anything that she did later. I'm just trying to not just paint a picture for you guys, but also for me to try to understand how we got here in the first place. And her mother basically said at trial, she had to tell the surgeon what you would want to do. And her husband at the time warned her mom that Taylor was going to get upset. So obviously, from that point forward, Taylor Parker could never get pregnant. There was no way it was scientifically possible. No way there could even be a miracle to allow her to have a child. Permanently, medically, completely, it would not happen for her. And she knew that. There was never a single moment after that surgery where she was confused about whether she could have a baby. She couldn't, and she knew she couldn't. So we have to remember that through every single thing that happens next. So, when that first marriage fell apart, the custody hearing told you everything. Taylor would show up without a lawyer and said on the record that she had no objection to her husband getting full custody of their little boy. And the judge really found that strange because it was really rare to have a mother volunteer to just hand their child over instead of at least trying to get joint custody. But he ended up doing just that. He ordered a joint arrangement with her ex-husband being the primary parent, and there would be a modest child support payment of $225 a month. Her ex-husband's attorney later said that figure was deliberately set low, that it could have been much higher given her income. But she would never pay child support. Wackesy testified that she didn't keep up the support and didn't live up to her visitation. And by early 2021, she owed more than $8,000 to her ex-husband. And the neglect wasn't just financial. His new wife testified that their son once came back from a visit with a staph infection, having gone days without his underwear being changed. And as for her daughter, Emerson, who wasn't even her ex-husband's, grew up with him as that fatherly figure because the actual biological father never showed up. So her two children have basically been thrust into the hands of her ex-husband, and she's just kind of out living her own life. And this is all very important because why, if you show such disregard for your own children, would you make up this lie about having other children? It really is just mind-boggling to wrap your head around the psychological understanding of this. Now, after a very short period of time, Taylor would marry her second husband, Hunter Parker, in 2018, and that's where her last name comes from. And it is during this marriage that a thread appears to begin to run. Because already knowing that she could never carry a child, and although she has blatant disregard for her other children, she began asking friends whether they would be willing to be a surrogate for her. Apparently, she wanted another baby badly enough to go looking for someone else's body to grow it in. But that marriage would fall apart too and end in divorce in 2019. And through all of that, the marriages, the divorces, going back all of these years, there was one constant in Taylor's life: the lying. And it wasn't just ordinary lying. There's nothing wrong with a white lie here and there to protect your personal information or, the feelings of a friend or a loved one. But family and former friends described her as someone, for as long as they had known her, completely invented her entire life. She told people she came from money, and not just any money, oil money. Or was it a syrup fortune? Depending on the day, she had family money from whatever industry she was feeling like that day. She had millions coming in from a wealthy grandmother, but her evil mother was supposedly blocking that inheritance. But of course, none of that was real. But they didn't just stop with these financial lies. Two former friends, Mackenzie Bright, or Kenzie, and Abby Bell, described that over the years, Taylor told them she'd been diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, that she was in treatment for cancer, that she had a brain tumor, that she'd had a stroke, one catastrophe, life-threatening diagnosis after the other. But none of them, as far as they could ever tell, found it to be real. Abby put it as plainly as a person can after it kept happening over and over and over again. She just started to think, maybe she's not actually sick. It seemed as though when Taylor noticed that attention was going to someone else for an ailment, suddenly she would decide, well, I also have that ailment. And then she would reap the benefits that sympathy and attention would sow in her life because human beings are going to care about the people they love. But then one day, Kenzie got pregnant. Like she was actually pregnant. And Taylor would become absolutely fixated on that fact. She wanted to help plan Kenzie's gender reveal. She asked to log into Kenzie's pregnancy tracking app so she could follow the baby's progress week after week as if it was hers. And Kenzie started to feel really, really uncomfortable because it felt like she could just not create a boundary that was going to be able to be maintained because Taylor was just going off the rails. She was fixated on this pregnancy. So Kenzie had to cut her off. And I can't even imagine how scared Kenzie felt after everything with Reagan begins to play out because that genuinely could have been her. The fact that Taylor has shown this pattern not just once, but at least twice, that she essentially gets fixated on a friend with a pregnancy. I mean, I can imagine for Kenzie, she just thinks that could have been me. Now, in the summer of 2019, just weeks after that second divorce, Taylor would meet Wade Griffin at a rodeo in Texas. Wade was a roofer and a hog trapper, that classic working country guy, and by every account, a genuinely decent man. People described Taylor the same way every time, too. She would just light up a room. She had a big smile. She was easy to fall for. And Wade did fall for her. Well, he got close at least, because apparently he never even said I love you to her. She just became obsessed with him. Very obsessed. I mean, this relationship moved quickly. They met in July, and by October of that year, she'd moved in with him. And she just brought him straight into her fake life. She told him about the oil money down in the Sulphur River bottoms, the millions she was due to inherit from her grandmother, the feud with her mother, who was supposedly blocking it all because she was so evil, the same fortune she'd been describing to everyone for years. She was just kind of pointing right at Wade now. And as her partner, well, he's probably going to end up benefiting from all this wealth, right? And I want to talk very briefly about this relationship she has with her mother, because knowing that inevitably her mother made the call to make it impossible for her to have a child, I can't help but wonder if painting her mother in this light, this evil woman who's trying to withhold all of her money from her, is to try to gain control over the pain she's feeling because and anger she's probably experiencing towards her mother for making that decision about the hysterectomy. When in reality, with what it sounds like the situation was, her mom was probably like literally trying to make the best decision to help save her daughter's life. Now, it seems like Wade moved very, very slowly in the relationship. I already mentioned that he never told her that he loved her, but it was surprising for people that they moved in together so soon. And in part, that's because Taylor is telling him these tales of grandeur and buying him a bunch of stuff. I'm pretty sure she bought him a truck, like a big, expensive Southern man truck. She was saying she wanted to buy him a property. She put together this presentation during the holidays to his entire family, sharing about this millions of dollar property she was going to buy for them, but they could never prove her funds. So she just kept getting into more and more debt. And then she couldn't afford these promises she kept making to Wade. So, in my opinion, I feel like this lie was all an attempt to get him to get close to her faster. Wade was a slow burn kind of guy. She wanted the white picket fence and the farm and the kids quickly. She wanted it fast, and she was going to get it by any means necessary. Now, I'm sure that when it seemed like the money was running out or drying up, she started to realize that maybe Wade was starting to question her a little bit, maybe not as committal as she was wanting him to be. So, very shortly into their relationship, she claimed that she was pregnant, and not just pregnant, but pregnant with twins. But soon after, she would claim that she'd lost them. So, grief would pull them closer together. Wade was gentle to her. He was accommodating to her. He wanted to do the right thing and stick it out and be there for the woman who had not just carried his children, but was now going through the trauma of the loss of them. And then in January 2020, she told Wade she was pregnant again. And this time she was committing to that lie completely. She bought sonogram pictures off of the internet, which you can do. I've covered this in a video before. I actually walked us through these websites that are supposed to be like prank websites. And I'm like, these just should not be allowed at all because you can fake pregnancy tests, sonogram pictures, HCG tests. If you were following the Clayton Eckhart case from a couple years ago, you've heard of the name Laura Owens, who now I believe could be convicted of 14 felonies and spend 30 to 50 years in prison because she faked a pregnancy with a man who never even slept with her. And she committed to that lie very hard. She doubled down and she lied on stand. She perjured herself, essentially. Dave Neal is still covering that story. He's been doing a great job of it. I also covered it. I'll try to remember to drop a link to that here for you if you want to go check that out after the video, but I'll also leave it down in the description box below, along with links to Dave Neal's channel. But I mean, this woman was posting all over the internet that she was pregnant. She even kind of late in the game bought a fake silicone pregnant belly because people were like, she's really not showing. She's really not showing. And then all of a sudden it was like, boom, she's got a baby. But the thing is, I don't even think she cared that anyone would call her out on these lies because if she was trying to be stealth about this, she wouldn't do some of the things that she did. She literally did maternity photos with Wade. She posted them all over her social media. She shared updates with people. She built a whole baby registry. And she threw a gender reveal party with a cow wearing a pink bow announcing that it was going to be a girl. And I'm sure you're wondering, okay, well, if you are in a relationship with somebody and you are living with them, how in the world are you keeping this all a secret? Well, she just kept Wade at a very far arm's length. She told him that she didn't want him to see her naked because she was embarrassed about her body changing and getting stretch marks. So she would apparently spend hours by herself in the bathroom, probably adjusting her pregnant belly. And then, since it had been the pandemic in 2020, this ended up being perfect timing for her because Wade wasn't allowed to go to any of her appointments. So he would bring her to an appointment and then sit out in his car while she went in and just sat in there for an hour and then came back out and was like, everything's fine. He was left entirely at her mercy. And he trusted her implicitly. And the lies just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, even the financial lies. I mean, Wade was taking out loans against this big sum of money that just did not exist. He bought a truck, a side-by-side. He bought cattle. He bought his mom a car. And then Taylor ended up being the hero. But she never paid for any of this. So that fancy car they'd gotten his mom was taken back to the dealership on a recall. And speaking of his mom, she was kind of like the MVP of this whole thing because she was starting to realize, like, there's no way this is all adding up. She actually seems like a really badass woman in the documentary. She is going online. She's getting messages from some of Taylor's old friends. She even called the dealership when the car was recalled. And the dealership was like, this wasn't a recall. Nobody paid for this vehicle. It was never hers. So Connie is just like, yeah, none of this is adding up. She's got her eye on Taylor. And the scope of these lies are just so massive. I can barely tell a white lie without feeling like my stomach is going to drop out of my behind. Like, I get so anxious. I remember trying to plan my husband a surprise birthday party, and I was like shaking every time my phone buzzed because I was like, oh my God, if he sees my phone, it's going to blow the surprise. Like, I genuinely don't know how she had the time or mental capacity and like no anxiety. Like, how do you not have any anxiety? Honestly, I think it is good for everyone to have a healthy dose of anxiety. I think it makes you a better person. I really, really do. Let me know if you agree with me, but I mean, To an extent, right? But dear God, if more people got anxious about how they affected other people, the world would be a much better place. But I think when you are so afraid of losing something so important to you, which in Taylor's life at this point was Wade, she needed to make sure she had all these schemes thought about in her head so that he always had a reason to stay. Now, as I said in the beginning, we really need to put a lot more focus onto Reagan in this situation because she's been living quietly inside this entire timeline the whole time. I mean, she has been in the center of it. And her full name is Reagan Michelle Simmons-Hancock. She was a young woman in New Boston, Texas. Now, back in 2019, the very same year Taylor met Wade, Reagan was planning her wedding to a man named Homer Hancock, and she needed a photographer on a budget. And a friend recommended a woman who did photography on the side, someone who seemed to be going through a rough patch after a divorce. So Reagan thought, okay, well, maybe I should hire her. And that photographer was Taylor Parker. Now, Taylor would shoot Reagan's engagement photos and then her wedding. And by every account, she was very good at it. I mean, Reagan's mother, Jessica Brooks, even remembered her as a polite young woman who captured the day beautifully. But the part that's really going to turn your stomach is that friendship deepened. Taylor got really close to Reagan and, in my opinion, might have kind of trauma dumped on Reagan and Reagan's family, and they all really wanted to be that helping hand reaching out to her. Reagan would pull her in closer. She would invite her to stay at her wedding and celebrate at the reception. She would keep including her in activities. And Reagan's sister, Emily Sheary, said that Taylor was around so much during this time that she almost felt like a bridesmaid. And that's one of the things that makes this whole situation so incredibly heartbreaking, is that Reagan was essentially helping a woman that, in her opinion, seemed to be really down on her luck. She was trying to reach out and be a helpful friend. She was trying to potentially be the only person Taylor had while she was going through something really difficult. Her instinct was to fold in a lonely woman who was having a hard time. But Taylor would exploit that generosity and nurturing, and poor Reagan would never see it coming. Now, Reagan is already a mom to a little girl named Kinley, and she would get pregnant with a second daughter, and she'd already chosen the name for her, Braxlyn Sage. And at almost the exact same time, January 2020, Taylor had told Wade that, well, she was pregnant too. So now there were these two pregnancies moving in parallel at the same time. One of them was real, and one of them was just a silicone belly. So Taylor Parker had kind of created this trap. She had a front row seat to a real pregnancy that was unfolding almost the exact same timeline that she had invented hers on. She knew Reagan's due date. She knew the baby was a girl. She knew the name. So through this year that she cultivated this friendship, she'd become deeply intimate of the one thing that she needed but couldn't make. But soon, doubts would surface. As the spring of summer of 2020 wore on, the people around Taylor started doing the math because seemingly Taylor had a lot of proof. But there were also some pieces of that just didn't really seem to fit. And that first thing that didn't seem to fit was the sonogram. Now, on its own, a sonogram doesn't really prove anything. It's an ultrasound image, just a picture. It has no real connection to the body of the person holding it. You can order one online. I mean, that's exactly what she did. A printed scan with someone else's insides on it is probably as much proof that you're pregnant as a postcard of a beach is proof that you went on vacation. It convinces people that what you say is true, but it's not real data. And Connie, Wade's mom, started to notice that and even called Taylor out saying, why does it say the year is 2016 on some of your pregnancy documentation? And Taylor, of course, just made up an excuse like, oh, the clinic was having glitches. Apparently hundreds of these went out. And honestly, Connie really had the right idea. I mean, the devil is in the details. And Taylor, although very devilish, she was not paying attention to details. A real confirmation doesn't just come from a picture of a sonogram. It comes from the actual tests performed on you. You need a real blood test that measures the pregnancy hormone HCG and discovers how much is in your actual bloodstream, which will tell you exactly whether or not you are pregnant, because you're not going to be able to fake your own blood draw. Now, an ultrasound done by a provider shows the gestational sac, the fetal pole, and a beating heart live inside your body. A Doppler picks up the heartbeat. A provider physically measures the growing uterus. These aren't things you can stage. They're either happening inside you or they aren't. But because of the time of her lie being during COVID, she was able to get away with all of this. She would literally just order some piece of quote unquote evidence off of a fake your pregnancy website, go sit in a clinic for an hour while her boyfriend waited outside, and come back out with a fake sonogram saying, "Oh, look at the progress of our baby." She was able to do it so easily. And the thing is, not everyone's going to know what details to look for. Now, a fake sonogram might fool your boyfriend, but it's not going to fool a doctor, which is why the only people who started poking holes in some of Taylor's claims were the ones who knew her medical history. A former friend, Kenzie, knew about that hysterectomy, and she knew as plain as any medical fact that Taylor could not be pregnant. So word started moving the way it does in a small town. Stephanie Ott, who'd offered to help with the gender reveal, started to get suspicious when Taylor sent her a sonogram with that 2016 date printed on it. Her friends, the ones that knew about her hysterectomy, started calling her out. They tried to reach out to people and say she was lying. Friends noticed those faulty dates on her sonogram and would bring it up to Wade's mother, who was already starting to put the pieces together. So Wade's mom and these friends kept talking. But it was really hard for Connie because she's just human. She's hearing that all of this is a lie, but she's seeing the evidence of it unfolding before her. And no one wants to believe that their son is getting involved with someone who is so deeply insecure and dangerous that they have to fake a pregnancy to keep someone romantically interested. So some of these doubts just didn't land. Connie would kind of reason with herself, like at the gender reveal. She'd say, Taylor's dad is here, Taylor's kids are here. Why would they show up to celebrate a baby that wasn't real? They'd know, right? I mean, it's the most natural reasoning in the world. And that's exactly what a deceiver like Taylor counts on. She needed her real father, her children, to be there because they became unwitting evidence. Their love got conscripted into the con. The warnings were there, the facts were there, but there wasn't a clean mechanism in the world for, I think my son's girlfriend is faking a pregnancy. You can't call the police on a lie. So the truth just sat there, known and useless, while the due date kept approaching. And then in September 2020, that due date came, and there was no baby. So this all should have collapsed long ago. Wade's asking questions. The family has started asking questions. The story is getting a massive hole in it. And this is where Taylor stopped being just a liar, but someone much colder. Because instead of confessing, she just started manufacturing reasons for the delay. And then she started hunting for a way to make the baby real. She started looking up places where pregnant women would gather. Maternity consignment shops, OB clinics around East Texas and over in Shreveport. And she didn't just search them. She went to them. She was seen inside and outside these clinics. She sat on benches and watched pregnant women go in and out of these doors. At one of these clinics, she even ran Texas license plates numbers, and one of the plates she looked up traced back to a young pregnant woman. She searched teen pregnancy support groups and reportedly went to a meeting. She searched the average weight of a fetus at various stages. She looked into midwifery, private adoptions. And on the very day of the killing, she watched a video walking through the physical exam of an infant delivered at 35 weeks old, which is almost exactly how far along Reagan was. She was scouting for victims, running plates on strangers, basically stalking pregnant women in her town. She was trying to find one who would either give her their child or she would take their child. And Reagan, the kind woman who had opened up her heart, her family, and her home to Taylor, was the one she had the easiest access to. And in the meantime, Taylor was going to come up with every excuse in the book and distract Wade from her due date. So while all of this stalking is going on, Taylor has convinced Wade that the doctors are going to induce her soon. She missed her due date, but she's so close. The baby's just stubborn. The doctors are going to induce her. So on October 5th, 3 days before the supposed induction, there was somehow an intentional fire set with a lighter that broke out at Wade's home, knocking out all of the power and the plumbing. And the very same day, a threat was called into Titus Regional Medical Center, and around 100 people were evacuated and inductions were canceled. And detectives would later connect that threat to, guess who? Taylor Parker. So she is doing all of these things to basically distract and delay her induction, a fire, a threat, all because she can't just say, hey, I lied about this. I'm going to remove myself from your life. I know I did a terrible thing. She could not just open up to it. She would rather cause physical harm. She would rather destroy property, allow pandemonium to break out at a hospital instead of just own up to the fact that she's been lying. But that very same day at Connie's house, Wade's mother's house, things came to a breaking point because Connie was just done with the stories. She flat out told Wade that Taylor wasn't pregnant. She'd had a hysterectomy years ago. But Wade did not take it very well. I mean, he still believed that he was about to be a father, and he was furious that his family was doubting him and his partner. So he stormed out. So very, very early, the morning of the induction, Wade was all set to go with Taylor to the hospital to finally meet his child. But instead, Taylor said that she had coordinated this hog sale. A buyer in Oklahoma was wanting a whole trailer of hogs. And while he was away, she would drive over to Reagan's house. On the morning of October 9th, Taylor set Wade off before dawn, driving a trailer of 150 hogs nearly 4 hours into Oklahoma for a buyer who had never agreed to buy anything. It was just a fool's errand designed to put him very far away for the day. Essentially, and insanely, she thought that she would be able to send her partner, the father of her child, almost across state lines, 4 hours away, go steal a child from her friend, and then go to a hospital claiming she had had the baby, and then call Wade and say the baby's here. That's what she thought she was going to achieve that day. Now, I'm going to explain to you what actually happened in the way the medical examiner testified to it in court. Dr. Melinda Flores testified that Reagan suffered well over 100 sharp force injuries along with blunt force trauma. A crime scene reconstruction expert testified that she was attacked in multiple rooms of her home, that she was running away. She was fighting hard for her life and for her baby. Now, after the attack, Parker performed a botched cesarean and would take the baby. And later it would be revealed that most likely Reagan was still alive during that cesarean. So it's so hard to think about. Imagine being at home. You see your friend at the door. It's early in the morning. You're probably worried, oh, my friend might have something wrong going on. What's going on? Let me let her in. Let me take care of her. And instead, she just attacks you. And your final memory is her taking your child from you. That was this woman's final moment. The medical examiner was led to believe that she was still alive during the performing of the cesarean. And not only that, Reagan's little girl, Kinley, her 3-year-old, was home in another room while all of this was happening. So then Taylor, the maniac that she is, took the newborn in her car and raced towards the Oklahoma line, towards a hospital in Idabel, with this wild story about just giving birth on the side of the road. So obviously she's driving like crazy, sporadically. And around 9:30 that morning, a state trooper pulled her over near DeKalb, Texas. She called 911 as he approached and said she needed an ambulance, that she'd had her baby in her car. And the trooper, well, he found a newborn in distress with an umbilical cord attached. And an off-duty nurse happened to stop by to help. But none of this added up. If she had had her baby in her car, where was all the blood? The blood on Taylor was mostly dried. There was none on her driver's seat, none on the floor of the car. But meanwhile, across town, no one could reach Reagan. So Reagan's mother had gone to check on her daughter, and she would be the one to find her. So when Taylor shows up with just dried blood on her hands, there seemed to be an impossible truth at the center of everything. This woman had not given birth. In fact, she'd not been pregnant at all. The baby, Braxton Sage, had been born alive. Doctors would testify that she could have survived under normal circumstances, but she'd gone too long without oxygen. And unfortunately, that afternoon, she was pronounced dead. 2 people were gone. A young 21-year-old mother and her daughter. She only got a few hours of life and a name and nothing else. And police were able to connect the 2 scenes very fast. And Taylor Parker, luckily, was arrested at the hospital that very same day. And Taylor's behavior at the hospital was already so suspect. I mean, she refused a pelvic exam, which I think any woman who just happened to have a baby while driving her vehicle would probably want to have had, but she absolutely refused. And I don't know if this doctor was just like so tired of her BS by the time that she was examined, but he was very, very crass when he said, a baby didn't come out of there. A baby didn't come out from down there. She wasn't pregnant. I mean, if you don't have the full understanding of the situation, you're probably like, oh, that doctor's a little blunt. But I think he was just so exhausted by Taylor that he was like, this is a messed up situation. And he just wanted to get as far away from it as possible. So obviously the cops would try to talk to Taylor and they would bring her in for questioning. And while being questioned, Taylor did what Taylor always did. At first, she wouldn't admit she even knew Reagan. And then the detectives would start laying out all of the evidence. Her medical records, a hysterectomy, a full exam proving she hadn't given birth, blood work with no pregnancy hormones, the baby's DNA not even matching hers. And so she shifted to another story. And then another different story. It was a fight that had spiraled. Reagan had attacked her first. She slipped and she fell. But none of these versions matched because there was no true version underneath them. Only whichever one she thought might be useful to her in the moment. So she was charged with capital murder and held in the Bowie County Jail to await trial. And over the next 2 years, instead of going quiet, she kept right on building. Now, this is some of the stuff that the documentary just couldn't fit in, and it tells you a lot about who she is more than almost anything else. Now, the centerpiece of this was a scheme that she came up with to frame another inmate, a woman named Hannah Hollander, for the murder. Prosecutors said that Parker fabricated 2, quote, confession letters written as if they came from the real killer and tried to get them smuggled out to a newspaper. A Texas DPS investigator, Briscoe Davis, testified that those letters contained details that only the killer could have known, including injuries to Reagan discovered only during the autopsy and a specific weapon, a crowbar, that had never been made public. So these letters were meant to prove that someone else did it, instead just proved that the author had inside knowledge of the crime. She literally wrote her own guilt into the evidence. And then she would tell these alternate stories to people in prison. To her jailhouse girlfriend, Lana Addison, she claimed she'd been drugged and taken to the scene by a gang, and that she only tried to heroically save the baby. Addison testified that Parker claimed that she heard Hannah's voice in a nearby cell, and that jogged her memory that Hannah was the real killer. So she was trying to pin it on that same woman she was trying to frame with those letters. And then there was even more. She would alter her jail clothing and would carry on relationships inside, and even wrote a letter found in her cell to the FBI offering to use her talent for getting inside people's heads to help them solve crimes in exchange for her help with her own case. What? What? Prosecutors would even enter into evidence a prayer devotional in which she'd written prayers asking God to put the blame on Hannah. That is how delusional she was. She was praying to God to help ruin somebody else's life. That's just, I, I don't even, I have no words. Because most people, when their lie finally collapses and the worst has already happened, they're like, okay, stop lying. There's, the proof is in the pudding. There's no way I could be believed. But Taylor Parker kept on going. She was scheming. She was trying to pin the blame on somebody else. But soon enough, her trial would begin in the fall of 2022, and it was a marathon with more than 100 witnesses. On October 3rd, the jury would convict her of capital murder. And then came a penalty phase that ran for weeks, deciding whether she would live or die. That's where the full weight of what Reagan endured became undeniable. The medical examiner who autopsied baby Braxlin testified that fragments of a press-on fingernail, painted with glitter, was found embedded in the placenta. It was Reagan's. In his professional opinion, it was consistent with Reagan being alive during the extraction and trying with her own hands, with everything she had, to hold on to her baby. She died fighting for her daughter. And that's the truth no story of Taylor's could ever touch. She died fighting for her daughter. Now, this penalty phase 2 is where one asks, what kind of person does this? And I think most reasonable people come to true crime content because we just want to try to understand why people do these things that are not just objectively wrong, but are universally horrific things to do to somebody else. And I'm not a psychologist, so I obviously can't diagnose anyone. But the experts who testified are worth listening to because they kind of agree even across the aisle. The state's forensic psychologist, Dr. Michael Arambula, testified flatly that Parker was not mentally ill, that she fits a rare category of people who are able to abduct fetuses who do not have a mental illness, who plan, who premeditate, who are meticulous, and who have a plan for after this whole thing occurs. He called the amount of scheming it would have taken for her to sustain her lies, quote, vast, extraordinary, and impressive, and noted borderline and cluster B personality traits. The defense's own psychiatrist, Dr. Edward Grippen, described her as a pathological liar with a mix of personality disorders. And there's a name you'll hear for lying on this scale. It's pseudologia fantastica. But this is not a standalone diagnosis. And the textbook version, lying without a clear motive, doesn't even map out what Taylor Parker did, because she still had an obvious motive and she knew the truth the entire time. The label doesn't solve the Taylor Parker question. Sometimes there is just not a clear diagnosis that turns the unbearable into the explainable. Sometimes a person just keeps choosing the lie. And this is one of the most cruel aspects of this entire trial. Reagan's favorite flower was the sunflower. Her family wore sunflowers to court to honor her. So, because Taylor just has to make it about herself, she decided to start showing up wearing a sunflower mask. And this was far after people were still wearing masks due to the pandemic. So this is obviously a quiet and deliberate jab at the family of the woman she killed. This is the woman the jury was looking at. And they only deliberated for about 90 minutes, and they came back with a death sentence and said that the vote was unanimous from the very first one. That's how little doubt there was in this room. So on November 9th, 2022, the judge gave his final order: take this woman to death row. She is one of a very few amount of women sentenced to death row in Texas, and the youngest. She has appealed multiple times and lost her most recent appeal, where her lawyers actually went to the Supreme Court, who basically threw out her case. And she doesn't have any more direct appeals remaining, so she still remains on death row at the Patrick L. O'Daniel unit in Gatesville, Texas. Now, there's still habeas review in the process, and Texas doesn't set an execution date until everything is completely done, so there is no date yet. I just want to remind us all of the victims in this case. Reagan Simmons-Hancock, who at 21 fought her last breath for her daughter, and Braxlyn Sage, who got a name and only a few hours of life. Her daughter Kinley has outlived her and lives with her stepfather, who really stepped up. And Taylor's ex, Wade, has been judged, isolated, ostracized from his community due to the sheer shame that they feel for what happened in their own backyard. This is such a tragic case of how meeting a single person, meeting one person, can literally not just change the trajectory of your life, but essentially destroy your life and your future. I think that's why a lot of us turn to true crime, because there's just this fascination with how people can be so bad and so awful. I think that it's a lot of really, really empathetic and kind people who watch true crime content because it's so far out of our understanding of the world, of our worldview, that we are just like grasping at straws to try to really understand why and how things like this happen. And I hope that I've provided some amount of education that maybe you didn't hear from the Netflix documentary or hear in someone else's content. I applaud every creator who has spoken about this before me. You've all done great work, and I thank you for sitting and listening to a story that's really, really difficult to be told. It's one we must tell to honor the victims and to hopefully teach us that this behavior is not normal, it's inexplainable, and sometimes people are just simply evil. And it's hard to explain why they ended up that way. I want to thank you so much for being here, for giving Reagan's story the time and attention that it deserves. And if you have more to share, please always share it down in the comments below. I really appreciate you for being here and supporting the channel. And please just stay safe out there. Always ask questions and always stay skeptical. I'll see you in my next video very soon. Thank you all so much.